Hey, what's up, guys? It's Pedro here from noobcoder.com, and welcome to part 6 of my tutorial series on authentication and authorization with the MERN stack. And in this tutorial, we're going to continue with the React portion of our application, and we're just going to start building out our components. So we are going to be using Bootstrap to style everything. So let's just bring that over here. And we are going to install it by the CDN, but you could use npm if you want. So I'm just going to copy this. And we are going to go back. And I'm going to hit Control B to bring up the Package Explorer. We are going to go to the public folder, index. And we are going to have this link inserted here. So this is our Bootstrap classes here. Okay, so that looks good for our index.html file. And this is within the public folder that our Create React app created for us. Okay, so let's save this. So we have Bootstrap. And now what I want to do is let's actually go to the source folder. And we're going to create a folder to hold all our components. So I'm just going to call it components. And the first component we're going to create is our Navbar component. So I'm just going to call this Navbar. Navbar.js. All right, so now from here, let's actually start importing stuff. So obviously we are going to be importing React. We are also going to be using React hooks. So I'm just going to use the use context hook. And we are going to importing that from React itself. The next thing we're going to do is import link. Now, link is from our React router that we haven't installed yet, but we are going to be using this. So let's import that for now. And we're going to import it from the React router DOM. Okay. Next, what we're going to do is import our service. So our auth service that we created. And finally, since we're using the use context hook, we're going to have to import our context. So we're going to import auth context from, and we need to go up one and into the context folder and our context file that we created. Okay, so this looks good. Let's actually create our function. So we are going to be using functional components. So I'm just going to say const navbar, and we are going to get in props. And for now, let's actually export this so we don't forget. So I'm just going to say export default navbar. Okay. And speaking of not forgetting, let's also install our React router. So we are going to be using the React router, and make sure that you're not within the root directory. So you see we're in the root directory right now. We need to go inside the client directory. So I'm just going to say cd client, and then I'm going to type npm install react router. Okay, so all this looks good. And let's get rid of this terminal. And now what I want to do is let's actually head on back to getbootstrap.com. So I'm just going to bring this over here. And we are going to go to documentation. And you should get a search bar here. So I'm just going to type navbar, and it should bring that up for you. And we are going to go and pick a navbar out. So I think this is the one I chose, and it's the one with text here. So I'm just going to copy all this. Let's head back to our editor. And let us make a return statement with parentheses. And we are going to return all of this. Okay. Let's just indent all this. Now, if you never worked with the React router with links specifically, what we're going to do is actually replace all these A tags with this link component, okay? So I'm just going to delete some stuff. So we don't need this button. And I just want to replace this A link with this link component. So let us do that right now. So I'm just going to type link. And this link component has to take in a prop of 2. So 2 is where do you want to go? So I'm just going to put /, and this is basically going to take us to the home page. Next, we're going to put a div in here. So I'm just going to say div, and we are going to copy what this attribute has. So it has a class of Navbar brand. So we are just going to copy that here. And this time we're going to say class name, because remember, we're using JSX and we can't use class. So we need to replace all the classes with that actually. Okay, so let's actually get rid of this. We don't need it anymore. And for the text, we're just going to type noob coder. Okay, next what we're going to do is actually come down to this unordered list. So if I indent this, you should see this better. You see we have a bunch of list items. I am actually going to get rid of all of this. And what we're going to do is dynamically generate these links. And the reason for that is I want different links displayed dependent on whether or not you're logged in or not. So if you're logged in, you should see different links than if you're not logged in, for example. So I'm just going to come down here and we're going to make a condition. So I'm going to say if we are not authenticated, I want you to render out unauthenticated navbar. And this is a function that we haven't created yet. Otherwise, we are going to render out the authenticated version of it. Okay. So again, we have not created these two functions yet. So don't worry about that. And this is going to be pulled from our global context. So we're going to go and use the context API. So that's why we're importing it here. We're importing the use context hook here. Okay. So again, I'm going to delete this span. We don't need it. And now let's actually get to the fun stuff. Okay. So now let's actually create. First, let's actually use the context. So let's bring that in first. So I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to say const, and we are going to pull out is authenticated. We are going to pull out the user. We are going to pull out the setter for is authenticated. And we are going to pull out the setter for the user. And we're just going to say use context. And we're going to pass in our context. Okay, so that should take care of this portion here since we have access to it. So if we are authenticated, we'll render this off authenticated bar. If we're not authenticated, we'll render this, okay? So now what I want to do is let's actually create these two functions. So the first function we are going to create is, let's actually create unauthenticated. So I'm just going to say const unauthenticated. And this is going to be a function. It's not going to take in anything. And we are going to return some JSX. So what we are going to do is we are actually going to use a React fragment. And this is going to be made up of list components. So remember, we removed all the li elements within our unordered list. So we're just going to re-add them back within here. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is have a link. And this is going to go to our home page. And we're just going to say li and give it a class name of the following. We'll say nav item, nav link. Okay, and these are all Bootstrap classes, okay? And we just wanted to say home. Now let's actually copy this a bunch of times. So we have a home link. We need a login link. And we'll change this to say login. And we need a register link. And we'll change this to register. Okay, so this makes sense, hopefully. So if we're unauthenticated, we want to display the home link, the logon page, and the register page, right? Okay, so now let's actually create our authenticated navbar function. So I'm just going to come down here. We're going to say const authenticated navbar. And this is also going to be a function that's going to return some JSX. So we are going to return the following. So just to save some typing, let's actually copy this and paste this in here. Okay. Let's indent this. All right, so a home page, we want authenticated users to have access to the home page. It doesn't make sense for an authenticated user to have access to the login page and the register page, right? Because you're already logged in. So we could delete these two. And probably shouldn't have deleted them. I should have just, in all honesty, just replaced the text. But this one, I'm going to make this our to-dos page. So I'm just going to say to-dos. And this is going to be a link to to-dos. Okay. The next thing we're going to have is a conditional statement. So there are two types of authenticated users. There's the regular user and there's an admin user. So if the user is an admin, I want to show an admin link. If he's not an admin, I don't want to show that. So let's put a statement here. And I'm just going to say user.role is equal to admin. Then what we're going to do is render the link of admin. So I'm just going to copy this and we'll paste this here. Okay. And let's indent this and we'll change this link to admin and we'll show admin here. Otherwise, if the user is not an admin, we are not going to show anything. So we're just going to return null. Okay. So if you're wondering where this user is coming from, again, this is from our global state. And remember, we pulled out user from our context. Okay. So if the user role is admin, render this link. If it's not, render nothing. Okay. And the final thing I want to do is actually have a logout button. So if the user is logged in, he's able to log out. So I'm just going to come down here and I'm going to say button type equal to button. And we're going to give it a class name of the following. We're going to say button link, nav item, nav link, and we're going to have an on-click property. So on-click. And this is going to have a function that we haven't created yet. So I'm just going to say on-click logout handler. And let's actually close all of this and let's give it logout. Okay. So I'm just going to indent all of this so you guys can see it better. All right, so that should be a lot better to see. Okay, so obviously this is our logout button. Okay, so this is actually almost done. Now, before I actually forget, I'm going to rename these classes because you cannot have a prop of class. It has to be class name. So I'm going to highlight one of these classes. I'm going to hit Control F2 and I'm going to change this to class name. And that's going to change all the classes to class name. So we're actually getting some errors here. Probably should have did this in the beginning. Okay, so now the last thing we need to do is actually incorporate this on-click logout handler. And for that, we brought in our auth service. Remember, we created a logout call within our auth service. So now I'm just going to come down here. I'm going to say const on-click logout handler. And now I'm just going to say auth service. And we have our logout function. So let's call it. And that is going to be our promise. So we need to call then. And we should get back the data. And I could say here, if data.success, then what we can do is set the user to data.user. And we can also set is authenticated. Okay, so what's happening here? Okay, so when I log out, I'm just basically resetting the user. So username is going to be an empty string and row is going to be empty string. And then we are just setting it to false. And then this success is whether or not we successfully logged out or not. Okay. So now let's actually do a quick double take of everything. And this should not be name. So that should just be class name. All right, so all this looks good. Let's actually use this. So I'm just going to save this. And what I'm going to do is go to app.js. So if we come down here, app.js is right here. And remember, I demonstrated that our context API was working. So let's actually just delete all of this and get rid of this placeholder. And now what I want to do is let's actually come up here and let's get rid of some of this. So we're not using the use context hook. So I'm just going to delete that. And we do not need this either. Okay, let's import the Navbar component that we just created. And let's also import from our React router that we installed. So I'm just going to say import, and we are going to pull out the browser router, and we're going to rename it to router. And we're also going to pull out the route component. And this is going to be pulled out from the React router DOM. Okay, so now let's actually use this router. And if you never used the React router before, it's basically a routing system for React. So you have this main router here, and you have a route component here. And the route component takes in a path, and based on that path, it is going to render whatever component that you want to be rendered out. Okay, so we are just going to wrap everything within the router. And the first thing we're going to pass in is our Navbar component. The second thing, just to render out something, is we are going to render out a route component. We're going to say exact path, and we're going to say /. And this is going to render out our home component. So I didn't mean to do that. It's a self-closing component. And we are going to pass in the component to render. And the component that we want to render is the home component. Now, we haven't created this home component, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's import it. And now I'm just going to save this. Let's hit Control B. I'm going to go to the components folder, new file, and we're going to call this home.js. And we are going to import React from React. And then we're just going to create a quick filler component just to render out something. So we'll render out home page. Okay. So let's export this. So export default, our home component. And now this looks good. So if you never used the React router, once again, you have a router, you put your route within the router component. This path is going to be the URL, so / is going to get matched up with this component, and this component says render the home component when you hit the / route, okay? This exact property is because the React router uses partial pattern matching. So if I was to create another route and have / something, it will actually render out both routes, and we don't want that to happen. So by saying exact, I say if the URL matches / exactly, then render this component out. All right, so now let's actually test this out to see if it's actually working. So let us actually start, and we could open up another command prompt. So let's clear it, just to clear the formatting. We are going to start the server up like so. So we started the server up, and if we go back here, we are in the client folder here. So now I just want to start the client side stuff. And let's see if this actually works. Okay, it seems like we are getting an error. Can't resolve React Router DOM. So if I bring this over here, you can see that we're getting the same exact error. Okay, so I probably did not install this module, so let's actually remove that. Let's cancel this. So I'm just gonna say Control-C to terminate that. And what we're gonna do, remember, we're within the client. So this one is for the server side, and this one is within the client folder. So make sure you're within the client folder. And I'm going to type npm install react router DOM. And let's see if this actually fixes it. Okay, so now I'm going to say npm start. And let's see if that fixes the error. Okay, so here we go. So we have our Navbar component rendering up here. And you can see, since we're defaulted at the / like so, that this is rendering out the home page. And we have our home page, our login page, which we haven't specified yet, and our register page. So if I click this, it's going to render home. Click that, it's going to render home. But we haven't specified the login page, so you can see that it's not showing anything because we haven't created it yet. So this is pretty much where I want to leave off in this tutorial. And I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.